Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, distinguished members of the EMPL committee. Great to be back, but sad at the same time that we can't meet in person today. Next slide, please. Cedefop, as you all know, supports policymaking in the field of vocational education and training, skills and qualifications. And in 2020, Cedefop performed well, in fact, very well. And this is despite the COVID crisis. I will not read out all those numbers that you see on the slide here, however, allow me to highlight that downloads and social media presence increased remarkably. So lockdown people did not only turn to Netflix, it seems. Our key stakeholders, it's the center KPI on this slide, appreciate our consultation far better than only just 3 years ago. And budget execution and staff parameters are all tops. For your reference, we also provided a briefing note. It's called the EU's Port of Call for Vocational Education and Training. It was provided and it showcases the story behind the numbers that you see here today. However, next slide, please. Please allow me to start with our Corona response and give you a little sneak preview of the interactive PDF that we also shared with you along with the briefing note. As they say, never waste a good crisis, and so while the pandemic also tested our resilience at Cedefop, it also gave us the chance to prove our agility and flexibility. Cedefop adapted its research and outputs to analyze the impact of COVID-19 on such things as the EU labour market, on workforces, and on vocational education and training systems. The left and middle column, sorry, you have to move to the next slide. I don't know if I said this. Next slide, please. Still the old one. Yeah, so this was actually the interactive slide I wanted to showcase in my remarks just a minute ago. And here you see on the left-hand and middle columns in this interactive PDF, you can browse to our research outputs, and on the very right-hand side, we cover our efforts in securing business continuity and staff well-being. So when you have this PDF in front of you and you clicked on the middle column, please next slide. For instance, the middle column, you would then see the next slide building up. Yes. And this would give you the opportunity to browse our COVID-19 triggered research and analysis, for instance, to our studies such as career guidance, policy and practice in the pandemic. That provides results from a joint survey that we did with the Commission, the ETF, our sister agency here, and OECD and others. Or, for instance, you could find our coronavirus and the European jobs market, how the pandemic is reshaping skills demands, where Cedefop, using its Skills Ovate platform, provides early insights into broad trends on work and how work is changing in the EU, literally in real time. This interactive PDF navigates to our web portal, so every time you go there, you will find our latest versions of our findings there. So please check out this trove of valuable COVID-related material, all of it generated on top of our work program that we executed nonetheless. Next slide, please. Cedefop has always spearheaded developments and contributed to policy making, and 2020 was no exception. We started 2020 with a consultation meeting with Commissioner Schmid, and throughout the year worked closely with the Croatian and German presidencies and engaged in the meetings of the Directors General for Vocational Education and Training, as well as those meetings of the Advisory Committee on Vocational Education and Training. And together with the ETF, we published a discussion paper that summarizes our insights from policy monitoring and outlines policy pointers based on our scientific and project-related evidence. In this way, Cedefop helped inform the renewed skills agenda, the first ever Council recommendation on vocational education and training, as well as the so-called Osnabrück Declaration. So we shape the EU's policy agenda, and our strategy is shaped by it. Cedefop is the EU's port of call for vocational education and training. Next slide, please. The key policy message is that vocational education and training is an enabler of the digital, green and fair recovery. It is not just a repair shop for transitions. Vocational education and training is also learner-centered, and it is lifelong. The attention, we believe, will shift to higher vocational education and training, and particularly to continuous vocational education and training with up and reskilling at unprecedented levels as a kind of new and permanent normal for all adults. Last but not least, skills intelligence that supports employers and citizens will be in the focus. And our work program that you see on the right-hand side for 2021 mirrors these strategic focuses as this list of examples demonstrates. Allow me maybe to mention only one highlight of next year. That's our virtual conference on the 13th of April on getting the future right towards smarter and people-centered skills intelligence. All this is complemented by a new web portal that we operate and adequate functional strategies, in particular in the fields of information technology and HR. Next slide, please. At Cedefop, we do not only look at what we do, we also care a lot about how we do it. And the newly formulated values in our post-2020 strategy reflect this how, in that we actually chose adjectives to express them. They reflect our outward-looking stakeholder, or if you will, customer focus, our inward-looking operational mode, and our general mindset. For selected projects, we will also establish advisory groups, giving our tripartite stakeholders even more immediate access to and influence on our work. And finally, within Cedefop, the ambitious policy agenda and the highly integrated nature of the solutions, for instance, when finding ways to increase the participation of adults in continuous vocational education and training, they all require an even more interdisciplinary and therefore cross-departmental approach. But cooperation must go beyond Cedefop. Next slide, please. Because cooperation facilitates superior outputs and impact, where the result of our joint work is more than the sum of its parts, and it facilitates synergies in service provision, where the total cost is lower than the sum of its parts. As you can see from this slide, Cedefop pursues this kind of cooperation within our family of agencies that are present here today, as well as with all EU agencies, as a matter of fact, and with international organizations from within our ecosystem. Please note that our mandates do not overlap, as they were recast only just in 2019. We regularly exchange and align our programming efforts between agencies. We share costs, services, and experience, and we strive to improve our cooperation continuously. Thank you very much. You asked about how does cooperation between agencies look in concrete terms. Now, on the slides, I had an example, for instance, with the ETF, European Training Foundation, where we do jointly policy monitoring in what we call the Copenhagen process. It's been going on for 20 years almost and will continue now in the phase to monitor the priorities, policy priorities in member states according to the Osnabrück Declaration. And here it's very clear we have a different mandate geographically, Cedefop for the EU member states, ETF for the neighborhood countries and partner countries. Nonetheless, we combine our efforts, we draft the methodology of the monitoring together, and then we execute it differently. There are further complementarities, like Cedefop being maybe more of a research institute, while ETF can bring the field evidence and the experience from projects into this joint evaluation of progress in the EU and its neighborhood countries. One excellent example of how we do this in concrete terms, there's also one I mentioned, is the European Company Survey that we do together with Eurofound. Maybe Maria wants to comment on that, how we do it concretely when she has her round of answers. To our size of the management boards being tripartite, yes, it's a big board. However, you have to see that these tripartite partners are also partners in crime on national level when it comes to defining vocational education and training. It's not like general education where it's mostly government-led. Here, as we're talking a lot about work-based education and reacting to immediate skills needs, all those participants in the labor market have to participate also in defining policy. And for us, it's important that, aggregating information from social partners and governments into Cedefop and also disaggregating or pushing out the information and findings and evidence to the member states has to go via those channels. So it makes perfect sense to have them on our management board because they are our partners in implementation when it comes to action on the ground. Last but not least, to your question of the recent court case, yes, on the 16th of December we were issued a verdict, and in this judgment the decision to renew former staff members' employment contract was annulled, and we were ordered to pay 40,000 as compensation for the loss of opportunity of that former staff member having renewed their contract. Now, please understand, this is a labor law case, if you will. It's also still within the phase or a period in which either party could appeal to this judgment. We also have to discuss this with our executive board, how to proceed, but you can be sure we will implement this judgment as necessary. No further comments on that. Then there was a notion on the teleworking guidelines, if the agencies or all of us should jointly look on revising what was last put in writing in 2002. I will not comment a lot. I will just make a statement from my angle, which is, of course, work-based learning, and in particular apprenticeships. Here we have to understand that certain learning experiences we will not be able to virtualize. I think the employers have done a great job in the last year dealing with the pandemic, trying to keep up the apprenticeships, keep up work-based learning, even though it was difficult to sort of have the applied learning phase only virtually. That is very difficult. So it has to be observed that certain things in this kind of education have to happen in practice and on the ground. Last but not least, and then I finish, thank you very much, Mr. Becker, for your statements. I couldn't agree more, of course, as you can imagine, and we really appreciate your support, and it's been a great addition to our management board ever since you joined, and it allows us also to liaise perfectly with the European Parliament and its committee. So thank you very much. Keep up the good work also from my side. Thank you.